Hello. It's time for Cardstock.
Excellent rendition, everyone. Welcome to Cardstock. Nick, Stephen, zombies.
Oh,
Where do
well,
we start?
first of all, it was great that meeting in progress came over from the Zoom voice just halfway through the theme tune was just timed so well. Secondly, this is kind of this is not about zombies, kind of, which is a good choice to discuss because that might be what attracts lots of people. I'll do especially as he's put so much work into the graphics. Stephen can take over sort of discussing the layout, but I'll discuss like the background, which is and feel free to share. Stephen turns ideas into things other people can actually see. Basically, Stephen said there's this paper about zombie leadership, which is a very opinionated academic paper on the stereotypes around what makes a good leader and basically how they're all wrong. And it's a really nicely toned academic paper because it's really quite angry, which makes it an interesting read, and it makes really good points. You might have seen it around on social media a couple of weeks ago. So then Stephen mentioned it in his newsletter, which I recommend you'll subscribe to. And from that, and he said, "Oh, wouldn't this would make an interesting subject for a game?" So I basically replied and said, in so many words, yes. Would you like to think about that? See what kind of game this could be. So we had, I don't know, I think it's only like 2 or 3 meetings, and we've got enough of a game that's worth discussing. So this is, I should stress, especially with how good Stephen's graphics look, this is definitely like version 0.0.1 for the geeks amongst you. It's definitely the alpha version, but it's an intention to give people a framework to discuss leadership issues and discuss where they agree and disagree on those issues, using as the format for that what we've called axioms from the academic paper, the statements on these are the stereotypes about leaders and these are how they provably don't work. So so if Stephen can sort of jump in, show you how it looks, take you through the very loose gameplay, and then either we'll discuss it or we'll play it, or we'll discuss how there's not enough cards in it yet, or something along those lines. But over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, excellent overview. And I think one of the things so I'm with the newsletter, I'm always throwing out, wouldn't this make a good game? Anytime I find really good structured thinking, where there's like, in this case, 8 axioms, I'm like, that sounds like 8 cards to me. You could do something with this. And so thanks, Nick, for following up and saying, let's do something with it. With that said, with lots of stuff on my plate, I was like, we got to keep it small, because I think even with this core, it kept like, we could add more cards and do all this. And I was like, I don't have time for that. Let's keep it small. Let's keep it simple. And what's great about that paper is it identifies in a very aggressive way, like 8 of these zombie leadership ideas, these axioms, and they're called zombie leadership ideas because they're beliefs about leadership that, even though they've been debunked or not proved, they continue to walk among us, and they're very persistent. And the paper actually gets into some of the system level reasons why they are, like people make money off of these myths persisting or these beliefs persisting. That said, when I actually started engaging honestly and critically with these, I was like, these are like, I see the framing of the paper and where the authors are coming from, and I think I agree mostly. But if you wanted to reach the intended audiences, I don't think this paper is going to do it. But the content's great. So is there a way to bring people into a conversation and a dialogue about what are really nuanced things? And I don't think it's necessarily always an either or. I think it's more complicated than that. And so this game that we've designed is to encourage discussion around these very nuanced boss level leadership ideas. So I'll share the screen. I'll invite you into this mural in just a minute where we can play it. we designed this as if it would be a physical game. So when you see cube or token reference, that's going to be a, a sticky note with your name on it today. But yeah, the idea is there's 8 cards in here, and I've got them all in the stack already. And every card will state the claim. So what's the axiom? What's the claim? What's an example headline? And these should feel very familiar. And then it'll say, but there's a challenge to this. This has never been supported by literature or research of any kind, and there's more to the story. So you'll see the claim on the top half for the top 2/3 of the card, and the challenge below it. And the game basically is we will read through this. There'll be a moment of silent reflection. So I'll probably set a timer for 60 seconds to think about this. Then everyone will grab their name tags or their tokens, place it somewhere on one of these platforms based on where you think you land. What's your opinion on this? What's your position on this? And then as soon as everyone's done that, we will discuss. And when you discuss, you must support your position with evidence or with an example. And then at the end of the discussion, if you want to move or change your position, you may. So that's the basic gist of the game. It's a discussion game designed to help small groups. And I think this is much bigger than what we intended. But what it just means is not everyone will get a chance to share, but we'll do it more popcorn style. It's a discussion game designed to help small groups critically reflect on their beliefs about leadership, bringing deeper understanding to a nuanced topic. With that, I'm going to drop in a link to the mural. And the first thing I'm going to want everyone to do is to come over here to the left as you pop into the mural, and grab a round sticky note, add your name, change your color. And if you're not sure how to get here and you're new to digital whiteboards, you can just click follow me in the down below, click on my name, you can follow me and it'll bring you over here. So grab one of these, add your name, change it to your favorite color.
Also in this, if you've got any comments but you don't want to sort of interrupt, or it's something that you've got the right phrasing but now the moment has passed, feel free to just type it into the chat, and I hope I remember to save that chat before the meeting's closed. And especially like if you're looking at this now, and even though it's a friendly group and it's just moving things around the board, if you're like, oh no, I don't want to play this, either I don't like games or the format of this immediately puts you off, an explanation of why would be appreciated. And we can sort of swap contact details. You can contact me directly if you'd rather not put that in the chat, but we're interested in all the feedback, especially what tends to get missed from games is the feedback of people who don't like games, when I think those are exactly the kind of people who might get the most value out of something this simple that we call a game, but it is a game, but also it's a structure around how to have a conversation.
Just on the chat thing, I'm pretty sure that I've got everything set up that I'll just get an automatic download of the chat. So if you forget to get it, just nudge me and I'll send it over.
All right. I see 5 players so far.
I have one question about I've got one question about the placement of things, Stephen. Just for my own. I take it. Can you go on these 2 islands down here as well?
Yes.
Well, you can go in between on any steps, or you want us on one agree or disagree.
I mean, actually, sorry, I'll rudely talk over Stephen. Put it where you put those where you think. If there's something about the explanation that doesn't make sense, or if you have an idea, it's useful for us to see what you think is the right, excuse the air quotes, but the air quotes of it is the right way to play this.
Okay.
If there's something that doesn't make sense, or if you think, oh no, there's a much better way.
All right. And for now, since we haven't started yet, everyone drag their sticky notes below the cards, right? So you're not taking a position yet. It's just the neutral zone, if you will.
It's just taking a while for that tab to load for me. The mirror board. I'm just waiting to get in.
Sorry. All right. Well, while you're waiting for it to load and get in, Nick, why don't we read this first card aloud? And since there's 2 of us, one of us can read the claim and the other can read the challenge. You want to do it that way?
It is. Which of us feels most leadery?
You know, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Who takes what? I'll go ahead and read the claim.
Yeah, go on.
So the axiom is leadership is all about leaders. And the claim is leadership is the preserve of those who occupy formal leadership roles and can be understood by focusing on leaders alone. And a classic example headline of this idea is The Man Who Saved a BBC Orchestra. And we see articles and headlines like this all the time.
And the challenge to this is leadership is proved by followership and necessarily requires us to study and understand followers. And for this example headline, the most obvious aspect of that is, of course, it's the BBC orchestra. It's not the orchestra leader or the conductor. So the challenge is, when thinking about leadership in general, it's who's being led that's at least as important. So if you think on that for a moment, and Stephen, you said you're going to start a timer?
Yeah.
Or...
I set a 60-second timer. So think about it. Don't take your position yet, because when the timer's done, we'll all take our positions at the same time. So there's no bias. So think about what's your position on this, but don't place it yet. Don't move anything yet. All right. When the timer dings, grab your name tag and take a position. All right, but not before. Oscar, do you have a position?
I'm just in the middle.
There's no platform in the middle. You got to go one way or the other.
Oh,
You got to go. Yeah.
got it. Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think, it's not a case of we shouldn't disagree in front of the children.
We shouldn't. Okay.
So as
right.
design,
I think it's good you've got to go one way or the other personally.
yeah, I mean, this is exactly why we play test. I mean, this is exactly why you play test games,
Yeah.
especially with play test. This is, I currently agree with both of you in that forcing people to go one way or the other is good. But also, if someone's just like, no, I see both sides,
Mm-hmm.
you should let them. And I like people being innovative with a board game, or I mean, a game design rather than here's the rigid options. But that's me thinking out loud. Do you want to take the first person through explaining their position, Stephen?
Yeah, and I'm going to start with those who have like solid positions. So John or Dave, do you want to Dave, I'm going to put you on the spot. You want to tell us why you agree with the challenge?
Yeah, sure. I mean, let's just take, for example, people like Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, obviously did not occupy formal leadership roles. And I think leadership is clearly a relational property. It can't be understood without understanding who is being led. So to me, it feels very clear that, and also we can look at many people who have formal leadership roles who don't exhibit leadership. So for me, it's the challenge doesn't say that leadership is not a thing. The challenge just says that it's demonstrated by the quality of being followed, which, I mean, if you just think about any one who's leading, who's not being a leader, who's not being followed, I don't think you could ever call them a leader.
Oh, good. I'm glad you highlighted that. Yeah, it is proved by followership. That's a critical detail of that. Okay. John, anything to add to that?
So to agree with Dave, but then and just to sort of to point out that formal leadership role. So I've done lots of things before where it's about acts of leadership which don't need a formal leadership role. And actually, when you get people to reflect on it and think about it, they go, "Oh yeah, when that person did that thing, that was transformative for us as a community or as a group or whatever else and so on." And by and large, a lot of the time, people weren't appointed to be specific leaders of the thing that was transformative and happened. They did the thing. So it's the formal that I'm really butting against.
Mhm.
And I think that's sort of like the followership then is sort of like is the act is the leadership rather than the person.
Yep.
Perhaps.
All right. I'm going to swing the other side. Rena, you had an almost like strong position, just slightly off. You want to explain your position?
Which is yeah, in agreement with that statement, right? That it's to preserve those who occupy formal. And I'm going to argue for the case of cultural hegemony. It is. Sorry, sorry, not sorry. You have gold, you own the goons and the guns, and you get stuff done, right? And followers need that, like whether paid mercenary or I'm just doing my job. And it's a sad state of affairs, but it is solid that whilst we might argue the textures of leadership and maybe softer power or soulful leadership, right? Like which again, if we name Martin Luther King, like there's always usurpers to the throne. You have these rebels, and I'm talking, I guess, Jungian archetypes, but there is someone who holds the crown. And yeah, so that's why it's like philosophically, I want to argue that it's challengeable and there are many types of leadership, but the hegemony rules really, and you can reskin it in different ways. Oh, but we have parliament now. But the fact that when we're talking about change making, there's so much deferment still to like, if only I vote in that one person, it will change everything. And so this notion of fellowship has some maybe dogmatic religious implications, whether you're political or actual religious or both. Yeah, fellowship. Like our metrics is based on that one, success, and there's also the fact that McKinsey is a CEO school, so people who are in chief seats around different corps come from McKinsey. What's happening in Silicon Valley? Yeah, it sucks, but yeah, followership is not because like you're just charismatic. It's like you got money and people will follow the money. The end.
Very good point. And I think
I didn't enjoy agreeing with it as such, by the way. So
I do think there's another axiom that'll speak even more directly to the point you're making. So yeah. Indy or Steve, one of you want to jump in?
So I went where I am because I think that leadership, there's a lot of context that makes a difference. So people lead at times and places where things work, and in other places they won't. So I don't think it's all about the leaders, because that implies you are either a leader or not, and I don't think it's that simple. Sorry, I've forgotten your name. The person who spoke before, I'm probably thinking in a slightly different sphere, because I think the politics and the big pit kingmaker thing, there is a lot of things going on there. I'm thinking more about either within a firm or within a situation, how do things happen, and people can become leader for a bit, drop out, and a lot of that I think is the individual and the context and the task. So I don't think it's as simple as just look at leaders and that's it. But I couldn't totally agree with the challenge, because it's not just the followers either.
And I said Indy or Steve just for sake of time. I do want to, Oscar, you took a straight down the middle of the road. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, thank you. I was just putting on the chat, right? Hearing Dave and Rena, both excellent arguments with claim and challenge. But for me, a leadership component is the motivator. Why do we need a leadership? Why formal or informal? That's why I'm standing pretty much in the middle.
All right. I like it. I like
And
it.
both sides, I think Rena and Dave explained really well why both sides also work, or why also both sides could be valid, right?
All right. And all right, just so I don't overlook anyone, Indy, do you want to weigh in as well?
I guess quickly, I think I'm maybe rethinking a little bit towards it's complicated, but for me, one of the things is that, yeah, where's the cutoff of formal roles? Because most of the reading I've been doing recently about various situations, there's a leader, and then there's somebody talking about their second in command or their third in command who made the big difference. And it's like, okay, you can cast them all as being the leaders, but most of the time it's the man who saved the BBC orchestra. And I have the suspicion that if we dug into the story, it'd be like, oh, his third assistant made this amazing difference. And not in every case, but very often that's the case. And I feel that's important to reflect.
Yep, that resonates a lot. All right, let's do a few more cards. Nick, anything to add before we go on or ask?
No, just this is really useful.
Oh, we skipped the reassess. Does anyone want to
Oh.
change their position after hearing everyone?
Yeah, sorry, I was just typing at people actually. That reassessment, which again is why playtesting is useful, is something it would be good to do after everyone's point, because it keeps everybody involved. But also, that's an awful lot of conversation if we want you to explain where you've moved your counter and why. So that's just something to think about, and especially like whether this is a facilitated game or not, whether that's something we want to encourage or not, is something I'm not sure about right now.
All right, the next claim, I'm actually going to show the one below it because they're similar but different. And we'll focus on the claim number 2, but it's the difference between qualities that all leaders have and behaviors or things that all leaders do. So I just wanted to preview that because I could see without that distinction side by side, we might muddy the two as we're talking about this one. So we're talking about qualities that all great leaders have. And so let's flip it. Nick, you want to read the claim and I'll read the challenge this time?
Okay, so the claim is there are specific qualities that all great leaders have. Particular qualities, e.g. intelligence, charisma, equip particular people for leadership. For example, you will read headlines such as the 3 top skills of great leaders.
The challenge. What matters is whether people are perceived to have these qualities by followers. And let's go ahead and reset our sticky notes until the timer runs down. And just to help, I'm going to put this one out to the side if anyone wants to reference the next one, just so there's a contrast. But we're talking about this one. All right, timer is going. So silent reflection. Rena, I'm kicking you off the podium there. Don't take a stand yet. Okay, when the timer dings, take a position on one of the platforms. Dave, is that an intentional neutral? Or are you still okay? All right. All right. Again, I'll start with those who have the most I don't want to say extreme, but are most clear about their positions. So Steve, tell us why you agree with the challenge.
So I think you could be wanting to be the leader and say you're the best thinker ever, but unless people, either everybody else is saying it's true, therefore you're forced into believing it, or you believe it, you're just never going to, I suppose, follow somebody properly. You know, if they've got a formal structure where they're the boss, you have to do what they say, you will do it very half-heartedly. If you don't believe that they're charismatic, you might go along with the flow, but you're not really going to be a follower. So I do think it is the perception of that is the reality, rather than some objective truth.
All right. John, swinging to the almost agrees with the claim entirely.
So I like what Steve says. The reason I'm over the other side is that word great. And I feel that if it was just about leaders, we could be all about the perception. You could just like fake leadership for long enough that you go, yeah, if we just make them perceived as being a good leader, then we'll get away with it for a while. I don't believe that anyone considered a great leader, you could fake it for long enough for it to stack up over time and everyone to point at someone after a period of time or after they retire or after they've done something and go, that was a great leader. So I feel it has to have, I know, I don't know if it's these particular qualities on here, but etc. But I think sort of like the greatness becomes inherent with truthfulness.
All right. Oscar, kind of swinging to the almost agree with the challenge entirely, similar to John's almost agree with the claim.
I would consider that the qualities or behaviors can be learned. Some are natural to people, right? They are inclined to do certain things certain way. But I believe everyone has a shot, at least to give a try. But I think there was some, I forgot it was Steve or John, right? It is all about the perception on who is going to be led. Is this the right skill set? Is this the right for the moment, for the situation? Maybe it's good for a different situation in a different timeline. But from a challenge, I think everyone has a shot. It all depends on the context.
All right. Rena.
Right. So whilst there's the factuality of leaders have certain assets like physical stuff like money, control followers, the programming of what great leadership is, yeah, is defined in memory. So that depends, yes, on dominant narrative. So it kind of balances that out. So I said like definitely leaders are in control, like the formal stuff, and then it's counterbalanced by the perceptions of what great leadership is. So you have political and economic leadership that's dominant, and then you have the likes of more social and cultural leadership from the grassroots. And then yeah, and there's lots of cultural nuances of what great leadership is based on, I guess, those needs. Having said that as well, apart from perception, and that's why it's not entirely under perception bit, so I'm kind of in the smaller square. It's because there's also a question, people will question this, but the psychosometric or psychological modalities of tests, right? So you might have different personality quizzes, but there's always House Slytherin, right? Like there's always kind of and you know, like I've seen it across students. We can't get rid of it, and people might not buy into the whole astrology stuff. But it's hilarious that people will keep saying like, oh, we've got like rainbow colors and 4 grids of what leadership is. There are qualities of, and I think it's less maybe to do with the form idea of like, are you a qualified leader because you're a king, or a qualified leader because you're a community servant? I think it's also just personalities and makeup, where you're more decisive, you're more flamboyant and extrovert. And obviously there's introverted leaders. But yeah, so there's this combination of cultural perceptions mixed with this individual profiling.
All right. I've received a DM to put someone who's not on the board on the spot. Liesel, where would you stand on this? What position would you take?
Hi. It depends, really, on why you're asking me the question. I fall in firmly to the I only play games if I know why I'm playing games camp, which I think Nick might have alluded to at the beginning. And so I find it hard not to be able to take a position on pretty much every one of these. I could find a reason to argue the case for every one of the possible positions on the board. If I was doing the game as a consultant, I would have a certain objective or outcomes or understanding that I wanted. If I'm in a leadership role and I'm playing the game, I have a different skin in the game. If I'm a member of a team and I'm playing the game, I have other skin in the game. And so I feel that I have to be very careful and cautious about what I give away, based on what it is you're trying to do with me playing the game. I am the original only child play games with myself kind of person. So if you're asking me to play a game with other people, I want to know why, what's at stake, and all those other kind of annoying questions. So I could genuinely find an argument for most of the positions on the board there, depending on what it is that the context of why you're asking me the question. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just genuinely, I think I've said before, I'm not super, I'm skeptical of games. I'm cautious and need to know a lot more context and what's at stake before I'll tell you my position on something. Sorry.
All right.
Can I just jump in just I mean, you just as I expect, you don't need to say sorry. That's absolutely brilliant feedback. In all sorts of ways. Partly, that whole thinking around games is really important, and we've basically and thank you, we've thrown you in and said, play this game because we want you to play this game and see what you do. And part of that is people saying either I don't like games, or like you've said, especially, and showing as an example of the experience in this room of just the whole, okay, so you're asking me to do something and put a specific position. Why are you asking me to do that? Is a really good point around this and how it might be used. Also, you said about only child playing games on your own. I'm a big advocate for solo gaming, having not done much myself and keep meaning to find the time and money to get into it. Do you think there's, I mean, sort of mainly to Liesel, but sort of to everyone, do you think there's a solo version of this that might be possible? Just here's a way to interact with the paper kind of game, or is that too artificial? Do you think you'd find that useful or not?
I think they would serve different purposes. I mean, you could get people to act with it on a one-by-one basis, and you can then aggregate that information, and that would take the form of research, and understanding teams or groups, or bunches of people who get to coalesce in order to achieve something. That would be different, I think, from when you're asking people to share it and discuss it, because there's more jeopardy when you're asking people to share it and discuss it. So, if I was doing this as a consultant, you would be aware that there would be leaders or a leader in the room who would have a particular impact on the dynamic, as you very well know, because you've done this. And then you've got, people who are, it's the gap between what we say and who we are and who we like to project and stuff like that. So I think, who am I sitting in the room with, or the virtual room with, and why I'm being asked to do it is really interesting. But who's in there, well, people will play it differently based on who's there, and how they want to be perceived. So there might be some merit in a certain element of anonymity element put in. So maybe you don't put your names on the card. There might be one way of play where you don't put your name on the card, and you just get people to do it and then discuss, look at where the majority of people, I don't know, there's something about safety. This is a hugely safe place here, but not everywhere is like that.
No, absolutely. There's a whole side conversation about my interest in war games and modeling conflicts in any sense where it's anonymized, where you don't have that metadata that you don't have in the real world. So I'm really, again, need time, money, sponsors, blah, 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 to investigate that, where people explore situations only knowing what they see on the screen in front of them, not knowing who's behind it or not knowing any history they might have. And I really like your idea of doing this like online but anonymously, with the caveat that there's all sorts of questions about how organizations take anonymous surveys of their staff, and they're kind of anonymous-ish unless they really want to find out who said what. But basically, I'm just thinking out loud and saying you've given me lots of ideas. Thank you, and thank you for sharing that here. And like you say, it's a space where people can.
Yeah, just to build tiny bit on that. I mean, one way of doing it might be to make it anonymous, but then you can ask people, would anyone on this side of the extreme scale, would anyone like to volunteer to suggest, rather than asking per se, because people have, not everybody's as vocal or confident as people on this call, and this is a super safe space, so it's a slight unreality. So I'm just sort of thinking about real world applications, and everything everyone has said, by the way, I could disagree with everything everyone said. It's really interesting.
I had some game design feedback. Just going up to the board above, not the cards, because I felt like there was way too much on there to read. Like, it's a massive distraction once you're in the middle of it. The other thing that I thought was, why not have a kind of a pawn and struck me there were 3 steps, like a status marker, which is the pawn is on choosing, the pawn is on discussing, the pawn is on reviewing, so you can see where you are. And that kind of communicates some of the rules, but just like 3 circles with a little 3D pawn, and you move the pawn from spot to spot, and then you would see where you were.
I love that.
That's a very kind of Eurogamey kind of status change marker kind of idea.
Love it.
I thought that text left and right is great, but is it on the way in but when you're in the middle of it, it just, like, the card itself could be bigger if there was less on the screen to look at, right? So
what about taking away the screen when they do the silent reflection?
Like,
so it's blank, or you have goldfish swimming in it, something totally different if you're doing it online.
Or just the card in the middle.
Or just the card,
I mean, like, again, avoiding the whole side conversation, is all online interfaces are designed for, or it seems to me, all online interfaces are designed for continual and open communication between all participants. As a game designer, you then have to fight the interfaces to make them more interesting, or to give people that kind of space. And like, the best thing we've got after like 4 years of these being so popular is breakout rooms. So I don't immediately know how that would be possible, but that's a great point. And that, as you've both said, thank you, Steve and Nick, is managing the player's focus is key. And thank you also, like a couple of other you said about sort of the amount of time needed for people to think and deciding how long that is. Lots to think about. Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up on Lisa's point on case studies. Like, could this be an exercise, for example, law firms, right? So, like when you, because they have to discuss like how leadership happens and who's in charge of stuff, but they will, the anonymity helps in preserving your career as well, because no matter how leadership's like, no, we're really open about your feedback, there's other political stuff and it might just scupper your reputation. So the anonymity or it works. And also I think the suggestion that we don't see the movement yet, it's almost like there's a veil and then you show the spread, because herd behavior, like if you see people moving a certain way, it will affect like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to be too divergent. Or you might think like, oh, I think it might make sense to group. So that does happen too, right? Seeing movement affects your decisions already without you realizing. And then on the second point of I think John was talking about the alignments. The role of a leadership, even though there's many types of leadership, has to sit in context with the, who they're leading, right? So there's a simple grid, so it's not complex, where you're either an eagle, so representing leadership, so eagle, owl, detail, counselor, peacock, influencer, or dove, like peacekeeper. And so for me, if we're talking about different types of leadership, the eagles, like they cannot exist without the place or context, like the company. Because and I think and this also relates to another typology of grid work, which is more game space, which I shared with Nick before, that your role changes, that you don't necessarily want to lead for too long because you've done the game and you might want to role play something else in the span of a certain time of your career, or you might want to encourage new types of leadership from other camps. So yeah. Well, yeah. So that was all like more like in additional context of the anonymity stuff, whether you just want to exercise this just for people who want to be leaders and it's just the C-suite, or is this actually a group exercise for the leaders are absent and it's just the followers where they need to decide what's going on, or it's a combination of. So yeah, just like the context of why and where this kind of conversation might take place. Obviously, we're playtesting it today, which I'm loving. So.
Just
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, just to follow in from Mina's stuff, that was really good. There's something interesting in having roles like that. I really like the eagle and the owl and the peacock and the dove. That you go, okay, so and then you think about it in context, and you go, so if you did it as a kind of like, what leadership type do you have, and what's the environment like? So if you asked a team or a company these questions and teased it out, you'd start going, so and obviously the metaphors are smashing together in bad ways now, but you go, you can't be a dove in a jungle, right? If the sort of if actually the sort of like the way that everyone answers these questions tends to, and I don't know if it's how all the questions stack up, but tends to the right hand side, where people don't really believe there's special qualities, they don't believe it's formal roles, they don't believe it's all of these different things. You go, that's a jungle. You don't want to be a dove in a jungle. That's not the kind of leadership's going to exist here, and so on. I wonder if there are commonalities in your 4 cards that you could say, okay, we can understand the environment, and then we can understand your kind of like belief of what type of your leader are, and see if they match. Could be another interesting way of teasing out something useful. Or even sort of like even asking the jungle, what sort of leader do you want? And just having people go, we just need someone strong to like butt heads together, thanks, because we don't really believe that it's kind of like it's a soft skill place, etc. It's just kind of like whatever is perceived. I don't know.
So I'm listening and absorbing. I almost don't want to say reflect to short circuit anything, but I will weigh in to kind of steer the feedback. I think who this is for is something that came up between Nick and I a lot, particularly with the title. And if we were forced to pick between, is this for like followers and teams, or is this for leaders? I think I would pick leaders. And to go back to the motivation, my goal, so I'll start with the opposite. My goal with this was not to fan the flames of those who kind of like agree there's another side to this about followership. Like my goal would be to those who are in leadership and reading these articles, like 7 qualities you must have to be a great leader, that they're also reflecting that there's more to the story than that. That would be my goal if I had to pick who this is for and what, and the goal being who this is for, and the goal being like deeper reflection. Just want you to pause and think there's more to the story than like 7 qualities that Steve Jobs did that you got to copy, right? Like that would be the challenge. Nick, what are your thoughts?
Oh, a lot. Same as you said, in not wanting to, well, but not wanting to leave like a big blank space and leaving people to think. And do get in touch with us by whatever means suits you. If you have an idea in like half an hour or a day or a week, and so something comes to you. I really like the animal, looks like bird, and context thinking, which feeds off Liesel's idea. And just yeah, so much of this is context specific. Getting people to think about those contexts is important. And I think you used the phrase deeper reflection, Stephen, is that is just having especially leaders do that, rather than like you say, here are the 7 things Steve Jobs did, so I should do them. Whereas even at the most elementary metaphorical level, what kind of environment was he in, and are you in the same kind of environment? I mean, even if you are, you probably shouldn't just copy and paste his skill set. But if you're not, that shows that basically that article and that thinking and that autobiography, that biography, is not for you. Read something else, do something else, think a different way.
So I want to ask a generative question. If we just gave you the 8 cards, which the content is straight from the paper, the claims and the challenges, and said, make a game out of this or do something with this, I'm curious what direction you all would take it. We took it in a direction, and a fairly safe one, like pick a position, right? But I don't know, what other ideas are there? Like if you had this in your hand.
I've got one. So, for instance, I'd get a group of people to rank where they are and have I still like the kind of, do you really agree? Do you kind of agree? Do you really disagree? And then sort of make people do it as a team, and then just say, and then run them out and go, let's do it quickly on their own and say, this is the one that everyone thinks they really agree with. This is the one that everyone thinks they really don't agree with. And these are the ones in the middle. And just use that as a generative discussion point going, we all think that people can't cope without leaders. However, what leadership looks like changes. That's the thing we disagree with most. And so you've got a really nice set there that you can just use. It's almost like a market research tool. It's just a different lens to take to that sort of questioning, and then just like drop it on people and say, you've all answered this. Now you tell us what it means for you and why you've answered like this.
So it sounds like instead of a game, it's more like a survey.
I think the input is a survey, and then the output is a discussion tool. Whether whether you want a game within it, I'm not going to jump down a rabbit hole of games versus playfulness.
Yeah,
I think you could do that playfully, but it wouldn't be a game in the same dimensions.
I see that same on my end, John, where this may be another tool to cross-examine a kind of a temperature survey on an organization, right? On how not just the leadership, but also the followers or the contributors are feeling about an organization. And I add another extra layer, as Steve was saying, well, the reflection or the outcome will be a reflection on what steps could be taken in order to take direction A, direction B, direction C.
I'm half wondering if you split the cards in two, randomize them and did like a repertory grid. Here are 3 cards, which 2 are the same, which one's different, why? And get people exploring their thinking where that would get you. Not sure that's necessarily a game though.
I don't know. So split it like the challenge from the claim, or different. How are you thinking about splitting it?
Yeah, so I'm thinking, so if you, so each of the sides has a specific thesis, and they're not necessarily opposites all the time. So it's like the one that talks about tyranny. Well, you could just have leadership can be used to support inequality and tyranny, and getting people to think about how that interacts with the other pieces might get, because I think part of the value is how people do the interconnects between these, and how it, because then it's not all, what more is good. There's actually quite an interesting interplay between the different pieces. So I'm just wondering whether forcing people to do that whole repertory grid way, where you're effectively forcing people to think about what's alike, what's different, and why do you say that, could get some interesting conversations going. And you could throw a couple of wild cards in that aren't actually in there as well. You wouldn't be restricted by the paper. Yep.
I think those were some of the doors Nick and I opened. We're like, I don't have time to create more content, but yeah, rounding it out and mixing it. I think I referenced a different game I have where it's about problem framing statements, and most of them are all bad, but I sprinkle in a couple good ones, and you don't know which ones are the good ones. So as you're discussing these as a team, most of these are bad, but you don't want to like say, oh, that's a good one, and or that's a bad one, and flip it over and find you're wrong. So yeah.
For me, like, right. So it's really great that you have these cards and that you can invite people to generate their own card, but later. So not immediately, because it will still be too intimidating. So there might be a halfway house of, because you're starting with this paper, it's good to have this kind of set, and then have the textures of, okay, political, economic, right? So the pestles of the leadership within different types of the sectors, and then actually challenge people to say, give a legit example, right? So to make it more practical. So not just theoretical, oh, in my experience, like as in name either a boss when you work, or is it a political leader? Is it someone in your community, right? So that they can identify actual people and case studies, that here's what we experience. And therefore, I think it will be a good educational exercise where the sharing is important, so people ground these statements in not just their experience but other people's. So it creates a thicker texture of what leadership is, rather than just flat theoretical statements that tend to get zombie pasted a lot. Right. So it will so from being zombie, then you bring it to life of like, oh, here's this body, that body. I'm like, oh, this person, right? So it becomes more human because you've literally and symbolically fleshed it out. And then I've just put a potential, because someone approached me the other day. I think, what, yeah, you might want to check out the leadership trusts, and maybe that's something that can be tested. So it challenges the assumptions and makes people remember, right, forget what you've seen on LinkedIn or Instagram. What's an actual embodied reality or physical experience that you had to support or challenge these statements?
Love
and
that.
maybe some visuals, but yeah.
And I think that's sort of what I'm at when I say deeper understanding. That's what I'm after. Like these are interesting. Like I read the paper, I'm like, that's interesting. It's a countercultural sort of position that it's taking, or counter norms, I should say. And but then the more I read it, it's like some of these, like that first one we started with, it's like, well, actually, I think you got leadership, followership, and you got context. Like you've got 3 things, and just the act of engaging with the content to think more deeply about a richer model. Like to me, that would be the win. Like, and so if people are sharing stories that get people to reflect more deeply and just challenge these platitudes, that go unchallenged, I think that would be a win. Looking at time, thank you all very much for playtesting the first version 0.1 of our game, or whatever it's going to be. John, you want to lead us in the outro or closing remarks?
Game or playful experience?
Yeah.
The closing remarks. That was wonderful. Thank you. That was a top hour in a good week. That was one of the best.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for that. The next month, I think we've got another Cardstock in. I will drop in the link to that. Can I do that now? Let's work out if I can do that now. I think I can do that now. And one last piece of housekeeping. If anybody watches Gardener's World, I'm on Gardener's World tonight, weirdly.
This has been
not really anything to do with card, but it's kind of like, it's definitely confirming my embracing of the middle-aged genre.
I was going to say, is this the most British episode of Cardstock we've ever had? Since you started with, I'm sorry, I haven't a clue, and you're finishing with Gardener's World.
Indeed, and Nick Kellett's pun there, Gardening World is chef's kiss.
I'll believe that.
So to finish that, there we go. There's the link to next month's Cardstock in the chat. Let's finish off with a nature-inspired rendition of the Cardstock theme tune, which we're all very familiar with indeed. Commencing on 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ooh, doo, doo.
Bum, ba-dum, bum.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone, and thank